So this screen might look very familiar to some of you. It might look very new to those that are new to PaperSave. But the way PaperSave works is, and ties to PairSoft Pay, is with a document. So that document might be an invoice that's actually gone through PaperSave through that approval process and created the transaction with inside of your accounting system, the ERP system. But it also might just be a document that's being produced by uploading data from your ERP system, if you're not using PaperSave, so that it can be processed for payment. All of this is tied to a workflow. I'm going to go into the workflow, and at the very step that we're focusing on, that approve and pay, it takes me to what is called a payment review step. Now, this may be the very first step of your process, again, depending on what pieces of the PairSoft tools you are using. But all of these invoices that we're going to look at here, there's 25 of them in my queue, my bucket, have been processed. That means they've been approved at some point, whether again through that PaperSave approval workflow, or they've been manually approved and creating and entered a transaction in your ERP system. But they end up here, and this is where you're going to build that batch. You're going to build that group of invoices that you want to have paid. Just like if you're going to run your checks tomorrow, somebody's going into your ERP system, your accounting system, running a payment batch, probably printing out that ledger, giving it to somebody to look at, circling or checking the boxes of the ones that they want paid, and then going out and running those checks. Well, that batch can be built from here, and it can also be, those checks can be, or those payments can be approved from here, or you can have two separate steps. Let's go ahead and filter this, right? These are all of my invoices. You can see if I filter by due date, I've got things that are due tomorrow, all the way down to things that are due into August. I might want to filter by vendor to make sure that I do include all of the invoices for vendors that might have multiple invoices. But let's actually just look at a certain due date or post date or invoice date or dollar amount. You can filter this list by one or many of those components. So let's say I want to look at all of my invoices that are have a due date less than or equal to, and we don't want to just do this Friday. We want to go all the way out to the 21st. So once I've done that, I've narrowed down that list of, well, I think there were 25 down to 20. And at this point, because I know all of these invoices have already been approved, I can at this moment just click all of them and hit approve and pay. And the data is going to go in two directions, and I'll talk about that in a second. So I can actually approve and pay all of these at once, or if I'd like to, I can go in one at a time. Let's go back out here. And if I was going in one at a time, I can look at them by clicking on a hyperlink here, going into it, or maybe I only want to look at the ones with the dollar amounts over, a certain dollar amount, over $1,000 or whatever it might be. We're going to look at this first one. Now, there are going to be a lot of fields on the far right-hand side here because my system is tied to an ERP system that PaperSave, the document management workflow and automation tool, connects to, but it might not be in your case. I also have a workflow that lets me know when the document was routed, who approved it, when it was submitted into the ERP system, and the payables transaction or the bill or the invoice transaction that was created in the ERP system. But at this point, once I look at this, I know it's been approved. I've now looked at the dates and I have my group of invoices that I know I want to pay. All I have to do is hit this approve and pay. So think about this box here, approve and pay, of the report that you might be getting from your AP team, if you're the treasury or the director of finance or whomever you are that actually is saying, yes, let's pay these invoices. This really is your approval, your thumbs up saying, I want to pay this. But instead of it having to go back to accounting for them to now run those checks or process it through the ERP system, the accounting system, to print the checks, do the ACH, By hitting approve and pay, data is going in two directions. One, it's going over to PairSoft Pay, Finexio, to actually pay that invoice, right? And then it's going into your ERP system and creating that payment transaction as well. So it's eliminating the creation of that payment transaction, and it's eliminating the printing of the check, the ACH, simply by clicking on this approve and pay, right? If you're using PaperSave in conjunction with your accounting system, that document will also be updated with the workflow status that says, hey, this has been processed to pay. And so you'll know by looking at it at any given time that workflow will be completed as processed to pay. Again, I can also come out to this list and say, I want to look at and pay all of these, right? And I can hit approve and pay. Now you notice here, I also have a rejected button. You might look at this and say, no, I don't want to pay this, and hit rejected. You can also be required to put in why, items not as expected. So yes, we've approved the invoice, but now we don't want to pay it until we work with the vendor. And so when I hit reject, it's going to go over to another step of the process. It's not creating that payment transaction inside of the ERP system. It's not going over to the PairSoft Pay portal for payment. It's moved to another step for investigation. And all the while, again, keeping in mind that that workflow, that audit trail, is tracking that movement of the document. All right. So let's say we've processed all of these. Again, we can hit this button and send them all over, approve and pay. So when I clear my filter, I now know that I've got these 5 left that are not due until the end of July, beginning of August. But this list will continue to grow automatically as invoices are approved through the PaperSave workflow approval process, and or as transactions in your ERP system are automatically or manually created. Data is going to be feeding into this step queue of a workflow so that you know immediately these invoices have been approved, and now you just need to approve them for payment. Simple, right? So what happens? I said the data goes in 2 directions. We're going to only look in one direction for today's webcast, and that's into the payment portal. And so to get to that, again, it's another tile on the home page. Not everybody's going to be able to see and go into all of these, right? But when you click on this payment tile, a window opens. It's going to require you to type in your username and password to sign in. And it's going to take you to this very first screen inside the PairSoft Pay portal. This is the dashboard. This dashboard is the summary of all of your payments based on the way you want to slice, and I call it slicing and dicing the data, right? Now, as a caveat, know that I'm really not paying anything, all right? When I hit that approve and pay, my data only goes in one direction, into the ERP system to create the payables or the payment transaction. Nothing really gets paid. So this is data that's been in there for a while, but you're the buyer. Your suppliers or vendors are here. I can search by any of those, the invoice number, date, payment status. Maybe I want to look at the stages. What's in processing, what's been distributed. I think this is probably the area that's going to be most interesting in the very beginning months of utilizing PairSoft Pay. Venture to say that the majority of you on the phone here are currently using or printing checks, or maybe a combination of checks and ACH. And so you're going to be able to see how your vendors, through our vendor onboarding and relationship, it will change the different types of payments for you, lessening those checks and increasing the ACH or the V card. I also can drill down into specific orders or payments. And I can filter, again, this screen many different ways. I'm going to just go to one to show you what the steps look like in terms of the completion of the payment. So this happens to be my supplier, my vendor. and they receive payments. This is Wex Enterprises. They receive payment via ACH. And I can see the detail over here, but I also then get to see the payment detail. What were the steps and the dates involved in the different steps of the payment? If an individual vendor supplier is still getting checks, because that's still an option, right? There are going to be those vendors, suppliers out there who say, no, I only want checks. Or maybe those vendors that you've worked out specific payment deals on, and they only will receive checks because of the discounts that they're receiving or what have you. We're not going to mandate vendors change the way they receive payments, but if they do still get a check, you're going to be able to, there'll be a hyperlink here that you'd be able to drill down into and see that image of the check, not only the check sent to them, but also the processed cleared check. One of the things that PairSoft Pay is going to do is eliminate that reconciliation back into your or manual reconciliation in your ERP system. Keep in mind, as we create those payment transactions, when that submit, approve, and pay is created, we're also now going in and updating when the payment has been received, the cash has actually been settled, the payment settled, the cleared check, the date, all of that information. So you're not going to have to do that manual reconciliation in your accounting system, but you will have access out here to see any of those aging payments that, keeping in mind, PairSoft Pay is manning for you and managing. So things aren't going to sit out there for months on end. There was nothing more frustrating as a former accounts payable admin than doing a reconciliation at the end of the month and knowing that out of all the checks, there were still, 10 that were outstanding and they hadn't been cashed. We're going to be managing that for you. But all of this data is here for you. This is your data. All you have access to it, but you don't have to process those payments anymore. It was as simple as filtering those invoices for payment and hitting the approve and pay and having those payments handled through PairSoft Pay.